Close your eyes for a second. Just take a breath. You can still smell it, can't you? That stale ale, the spilled rum, the heavy salt air blowing in right off the docks of Makino's Tavern back in Fuchsia Village. We were just kids back then, you and me, sitting shoulder to shoulder, dreaming of the sea. But tonight, man, I don't want to talk about our dreams. I want you to really remember the raw, bloody reality of our captain's true power. The power that literally forged this crew in fire and ice. You remember the exact moment it happened, right? Shanks kicked those tavern doors wide open, carrying that small wooden chest. He didn't just have one piece of cursed fruit that day. He had two. And we sat there and watched Luffy, completely blind with hunger, just reach in and gorge himself on the second one. Obviously, neither of us knew it yet, but the second that bitter pulp slid down his throat, the very fabric of our world just violently tore itself apart.
Part 1. The Mistake in the Tavern. You grabbed my arm so hard when Luffy started coughing. It wasn't that funny, rubbery stretch of a boy becoming elastic, like in the old tales. No, it was this visceral, immediate horror. We just sat there, completely paralyzed, watching his small, fragile body mutate into an untamed catastrophe right in front of our eyes. And when Shanks lunged forward and grabbed him by the arm, I will absolutely never forget the terrifying shock that washed over the pirate's face. The instant he made contact, the flesh on Shanks' hand began freezing solid, or phasing right through, blinding right, or blistering against living magma. The floorboards beneath the kid just splintered and cracked under this unfathomable gravity, thick roots bursting straight up from the wood. Shanks realized, in a heartbeat, he was holding onto an unyielding force of nature.
And because of that sheer, catastrophic power, everything changed. When that coastal beast attacked, Luffy didn't need saving the same way. Shanks actually walked away with both his arms intact, his strength completely whole. He left that other fruit, the Nika fruit, for Roger's bloodline, for Ace. But even then, looking at the monstrous elemental force our friend had become, Shanks still took Roger's straw hat off his own head and crowned our new captain.
Part 2. Bloodless Victories of East Blue. So, 10 years passed, 10 long years of watching him just contain the apocalypse inside his own skin. When we finally set sail, it was like the sea itself bowed to him. Remember looking over the edge of our little boat, feeling that bone-deep chill, and just watching our captain step out and walk straight across the frozen, solid ocean water? It was so eerie. We weren't really sailing, it was an undisputed conquest. Look back at the men who thought they ruled the East Blue. Alvida, Morgan, Buggy, Kuro, Krieg, Arlong. We used to be terrified of them. But against him? Man, it was just a massacre of arrogance. They swung their blades, fired their guns, completely and entirely ignorant of hockey. You and I just stood back with this grim satisfaction as their weapons passed harmlessly right through his body, right before they were effortlessly crushed under massive rubble or burned away into nothing but drifting ash. They never even laid a single finger on him.
Part 3. The White Hunters Smoke.
But you know, the arrogance of the East Blue totally died the day we docked in Logtown. You felt it too, right? That suffocating, choking dread just settling over the plaza. We thought we were untouchable. We really thought our captain was a god walking among men. And then came the White Hunter. Smoker poured into the streets like a relentless cloud of death. He was the very first true nightmare we ever faced. The heavy rain just hissed and turned to steam against the tip of his weapon, sea prism stone. For the first time in 10 years, we watched our so-called invincible captain become solid flesh again, slammed face first into the cobblestones, gasping for air. We were utterly helpless. You were screaming his name, but honestly, what could we even do? A forest of wood is completely useless against choking smoke. Ice and magma only stirred the gale, and there is no amount of crushing gravity that can pin down a drifting cloud. As Smoker raised his weapon, we both knew only a body made of pure light could have blinded him long enough for us to flee. If Dragon hadn't stepped from the shadows that exact day, our journey would have absolutely ended right there in the rain. That was the day we truly understood what a Logia actually was. It's not just some parlor trick or a mutated body, it's the raw, apocalyptic force of the universe claiming a mortal soul. We realized right then and there that the Grand Line was waiting for us, and it was entirely populated by these untouchable cataclysms.
Part 4. Clashing Gods of the Grand Line.
So we crossed the mountain, and the Grand Line basically bled before us.
Weaklings like Wapple and Moria, they fell the moment they locked eyes with him, and CP9's Lucci was just buried alive under the collapsing stones of Ini's lobby without a prayer. Yet, it wasn't all effortless slaughter. You still wake up in a cold sweat remembering the blistering heat of Alabasta, don't you? Yeah, me too. Crocodile nearly buried us in those dunes. Our captain had to rely on his melting frost just to mimic water so he could strike the warlord, or use his magma to literally fuse the desert sand into jagged glass. If he had waded into that fight relying on roots of wood, Crocodile would have drained him to dust in seconds, and our bones would still be buried in that tomb.
And Skypia. Man, the air was so incredibly thin, our lungs were burning, all while the sky tore open with this deafening thunder. Fighting Enel wasn't a battle. It was a brutal, agonizing test of survival. We literally watched our captain absorb millions of volts as living, blinding light, risking absolute annihilation as highly conductive liquid magma. Every single strike was a massive gamble with his life.
Part 5. Chaos at the Summit War. Then, the world truly broke. You and I waited on the ship, huddled around the Denden Mushi broadcasts, picturing him plunging into the suffocating, pitch-black depths of Impel Down and rising up into the blood-soaked frost of Marineford. He met Blackbeard in the dark. Teach's darkness was this terrifying void that swallowed even light itself, dragging everything into an inescapable abyss. The moment he touched you, your nature was completely nullified, leaving your mortal body utterly exposed to be shattered. You know as well as I do, the crushing weight of gravity was literally the only force our captain had capable of grinding Blackbeard into the stone without making fatal physical contact.
And at Marineford, the true horror of his power was unleashed on the world stage. He turned the execution grounds into a grotesque, twisted nightmare. Giant roots sprouted right through the ice, impaling the battlefield, violently draining the life force from terrified Marines just to heal his own wounds. He defied Akayunu's boiling magma, refusing to burn, tearing down the scaffolding to reach his brother. It was a beautiful, deeply terrifying slaughter. Part 6. Apocalyptic Awakening in Wano.
We survived it, though. 2 years of brutal hockey training shaped him into something even darker, even more absolute. Fishman Island and Dressera, nothing but stepping stones for us. We dragged ourselves into Wano, staring up at these skies completely choked with black ash and burning fire, basically preparing for the end of the world. You were right there, bleeding on the roof of Onigashima. You felt the sheer exhaustion as we watched him awaken the deepest, darkest depths of his Logia power. The Emperor's wind blades shredded the living forest, but our captain didn't even flinch. He called down a relentless bombardment of flaming meteors, tearing the floating island apart piece by bloody piece, striking with blinding flashes of pure light fueled by the overwhelming pressure of his conqueror's hockey. Kaido was a beast that belonged to the sky, but our captain possessed the only 2 elements cold and heavy enough to deny him flight. We watched, our breath totally visible in the freezing air as the crushing, suffocating weight of gravity and the bone-chilling grip of ice slowly, agonizingly dragged that massive winged dragon down into the dirt, basically grinding his spirit to dust. When it was finally over, there was no grand celebration, no cheering, just an apocalyptic silence. The earth cracked wide open, and Kaido met his absolute end, submerged completely, swallowed whole by the blinding, boiling magma of the Earth's core. We just stood on the edge of the crater, staring down at the ruin our captain had wrought. You and I followed him through hell. We watched a boy from Fuchsia Village become a living, breathing cataclysm just to conquer these brutal seas. But late at night, when the ship is quiet and the waves are dark, I have to ask you, if Shanks had taken him on his ship that very day in the tavern, unleashing that absolute devastation from the very beginning, what kind of world would even be left for the rest of us?